Number 10. The Thunderbolts. There is a time in the comics where it looked like Earth had lost most of its heroes, and Baron Zemo saw this lull as the perfect time to organize a super team of his own. Although his crew, composed mostly of villains, pretended to be a force for good, they originally had evil intentions. The MCU Zemo, played by Daniel Bruhl, definitely has the intelligence and financial resources to pull together a Thunderbolts crew. Daniel Bruhl's Zemo has already been portrayed in a more sympathetic light in 2021's The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and the Thunderbolts movie may see him continue to seek redemption for his past by spearheading a team of would-be heroes, or anti-heroes, or even possibly villains. It's also been shown that Julia Louis-Dreyfus Contessa Valentina Allegra de Fontaine is a major character in the movie. We've seen Contessa appear in several Phase 4 post-credit scenes already, recruiting characters like Florence Pugh's Yelena Belova and Wyatt Russell's John Walker to her mysterious cause. Contessa may be forming the Thunderbolts in response to the dissolution of the Avengers, but given the character's often treacherous nature in the comics, it's easy to imagine Contessa doing something villainous. I'm just imagining an eventual team-on-team fight like in Civil War instead of just having another big bad. Number 9. Nightmare. Originally hailing from the dream dimension, the demon known as Nightmare can imprison a being's astral form and torment them. There have been several hints of Nightmare lurking in the background. On Loki, Mobius appears to make reference to the villain's name, and although Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. might not be canon, it definitely introduced the concept of a dream dimension. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness made a statement about how dreams were actually visions into alternate universe versions of yourself, and with dreams comes nightmares. Imagine if Nightmare had been manipulating the dreams of someone like the Scarlet Witch to make her go a little bonkers. Nightmare is one of Doctor Strange's oldest foes, and it makes sense that he would show up, but I'm not entirely convinced he would be an Avengers level threat. Number 8. Mephisto. On that note, the Marvel Cinematic Universe does feel like it's preparing itself to embrace the darker elements of its comic book counterparts, with projects such as Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness and Moon Knight out and about, and Blade on the way with the Black Knight semi-introduced, not to mention the Dweller in Darkness and Shang-Chi. The MCU is getting a darker side, and what's darker than some demons? And if we're talking demons, why not start with one a few of us thought was going to be showing up in the Loki show? Mephisto is the perfect villain to anchor that hell on earth conflict that seems to be coming for Doctor Strange and the other characters who also happen to be a part of the Midnight Suns, a team of mystically powered occult fighters. It would be a unique villain for the Avengers, or maybe an MCU Midnight Suns team to face. Number 7. Chthon. Last on the list of possible demons would have to be the Elder God Chthon. As the Earth's first black magician, he would make an excellent Doctor Strange villain, or even a mystical based threat like Mephisto or Nightmare. More than that though, he was the creator of the Darkhold, that dark magical book that first showed up in WandaVision and then more recently in the Multiverse of Madness, where it corrupted the Scarlet Witch. Funnily enough, something similar happened in the comics too, only the Darkhold corrupted Wanda for the express purpose of releasing Chthon into the world. In the Darkhold story, it is Wanda who does eventually defeat Chthon with the quote-unquote help of Doctor Doom, and given her recent transgressions in WandaVision and Multiverse of Madness, it might be a nice way for her to redeem her character. Maybe. Number 6. Kang the Conqueror. Jonathan Majors will portray the notable villain of Kang the Conqueror in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania for the first time outside of the Loki series. But there's no way a villain of this threat level will stop there. Kang's advanced tech, large intellect, and ability to time travel means he can make intricate plans to attack enemies before they even know what hit them. One great story for the MCU to draw upon is Kang War. Now many fans wondered why the Avengers did not simply go back in time and de-life Thanos as a baby in Avengers Endgame, as kind of a joke, but this story follows up on that idea, but with a villain that can combat it. Kang's retaliation by going around attacking baby versions of the Avengers and erasing them from existence is an even darker version of the blip. Sam Wilson, Jane Foster, Peter Parker, and the daughter of Hank Pym and Vision are all members of the current Avengers roster and all play a part in the story. In addition to new faces we know are coming like the Black Knight. Not only do the heroes match up, but it also provides an epic and compelling story about Kang, properly demonstrating the power that Kang wields while showing his influence on history. Number 5. Doctor Doom. Once Marvel announced a Fantastic Four film was on the horizon, they pretty much confirmed that we would see Doctor Doom, one of the most famous supervillains in Marvel's lineup. It's incredibly unlikely that they'd leave him out of the new adaptation. Although Doctor Doom was introduced as a Fantastic Four foe, he has the resources and power, both magical and technological, to take on the current MCU Avengers easily. We can also easily see Earth's mightiest heroes meeting the MCU's Doom within the next few years. There's even the possibility of Doom becoming the next big bad of the MCU. Kevin Feige has been dropping some not so subtle hints about the possibility of secret wars taking place within the MCU, and no matter which version they adapt, Doctor Doom is a crucial character in all those stories. Personally, I hope it's the 2015 version, as we have already heard mention of the incursions from Reed Richards, and with the sacred timeline going into complete upheaval, it's possible that could be in an incursion starting event. Just give me God Emperor Doom already!
Number 10, Mystique. Seriously, I do not know how I'm going to narrow this list down to like just 10 mutants, but I'm definitely going to try my best. So don't judge me too harshly for the 10 that I pick, because you know, there's like over 100 I want to see, really. Mystique is another iconic mutant that we would need to have again in the films. Despite the fact that we've already gotten 2 iterations of this character who were both really great, there is always room for more Mystique, I think. She also happens to be one of the best mutant villains out there because she's a complex character who doesn't really believe in right or wrong, just what she needs to get done. She's out to protect herself, whatever the cost, and sometimes even to protect those who are closest to her and who she loves. Or simply to hurt people that have hurt her, those are the people who she loves. Number 9, Multiple Man. Multiple Man is Jamie Madrox. I don't know why I love Jamie so much. It could have to do with the fact that he's a bit of a mess, and the idea that even if you could make countless duplicates of yourself, Jamie kind of proves that it might still not be enough. You know, if you can't get your own self and your own stuff together. I feel like I relate to that as a person who's trying to do a million things and is sometimes like, I feel like it's the fact that I'm not together that's preventing this from happening. He's like a lovable oaf sometimes too. That and his power is actually really cool and really interesting, and wouldn't be too hard to do from a visual effects standpoint anyways, at least in terms of having the duplicates appear on screen. And it's a role that would likely be really fun to play, as whoever plays Jamie would also get to play all of his dupes.
At number 10 we have Hindsight Lad. Okay, there are going to be some joke characters on here, but I'm not messing around when I say that some of these extra weird ones would actually do well in the MCU, at least for a moment. For example, Hindsight Lad. Although he's very silly and probably not meant to be more than a gag character in the comics, I think would be a very funny throwaway joke for the bigger Marvel fans. In the comics, Hindsight Lad is actually just computer programmer Carlton Lafroige, who tries to pass off the ability of learning from the past as a superpower to make it onto the new Warriors team. What's even dumber than the name is that he actually makes it onto the team and quickly becomes the least liked member. But I don't see the MCU taking the joke that far, but I could see a non-superpowered supporting character taking on the goofy mantle for a one-off joke. At number 9 we have Dupe. As silly as this character seems, he's not much more bizarre than Rocket Raccoon, and that character has proven to have made a seamless transition into the MCU since his debut in 2014. Okay, Dupe is a little sillier. He's an alien creature who looks like a green bean with arms and a face, but he has a huge range of powers and an actually pretty impressive strength level, giving him enough to hold up in a battle with Thor. He can shoot psionic energy and also use, get this, bass guitar to channel the power of the funk. He also uses a gun called the Ultimate Nullifier, which shoots bees, chainsaws, and bowling balls out of it. He's probably the weirdest character on this list in all respects, but maybe he would be a fun cameo in a battle set in space in an upcoming movie, or maybe just somewhere in the background for a second. Once again, I really think this character should only exist as a fun moment and not by any means be featured in any front-running role. I don't want to watch the MCU destroy their legacy any more than the next guy. At number 8 we have Phone Ranger. Okay, it's getting hard to keep up this charade that I actually want these characters woven into the MCU in any major way. I think it's fair to say that any of these heroes so far would be funny to see briefly just for the meme of it, but I don't want to pretend I'd actually want a Phone Ranger series or even a scene with him any longer than 2 minutes. Because this hero is literally a phone repairman with a mini spaceship. After an average phone repairman named A.G. Bell discovers a tiny ship trapped in one of the phones he's repairing, pairing, he gains access to every communication system in the world. This isn't the most compelling power set or origin story, but I don't know, maybe we could even just see an homage to this weird superhero when Ant-Man flies a tiny ship out of a telephone speaker or something, I don't know. At number 7 we have Grasshopper. This guy is known as a bit of a loser in the comics, having been killed off a handful of times in pretty embarrassing ways. But despite this, and despite the fact that he's based on a much less cool insect than Spider-Man, I think he has some potential. Even if he's kept as a sort of B character, I think he could fit into the MCU in some weird way. I think his costume isn't badly designed, and well, that's kind of it. I think he could do for a modernization upgrade, but maybe one of the Marvel heroes' out of touch parents could take on the mantle for a bit, or an annoying older brother or something like that. He only joins the Great Lakes Avengers in the comics, so maybe in the future an MCU version of the Young Avengers could come across the GLA and we can catch a glimpse of Grasshopper. At number 6 we have Glob Herman. With hints at mutants appearing in phase 5 of the MCU, we may be able to see some X-Men in the MCU pretty soon. Now, I don't think they'll be rushing to get Glob Herman on the big screen before Wolverine or Magneto, let's say, but there's a chance that if they really dive into the X-Men storylines and characters, we can expect to see a whole slew of new characters, and maybe Glob Herman will make a cameo. Glob has a thick layer of wax instead of skin, which is transparent and allows you to see his skeleton and organs moving around in there. But he isn't entirely useless and is actually known to be relatively important as a character in the comics. He can light himself on fire and fling hot flaming wax at his enemies, which isn't an awful power set, but it's also pretty bad. At number 5 is Doorman. Okay, this is another one like Grasshopper that I genuinely think could have a chance at making an appearance in the MCU. Aside from his god-awful name and reputation as a pretty ridiculous hero, I think his power set and aesthetic are pretty dang cool. And no, he isn't super good at holding the door for people. He's actually got the ability to create portals as well as making himself totally intangible. And that pairing of powers actually matches up to being a pretty powerful combination. And tied in with his cool black and white color scheme, I honestly think that this guy can make an appearance in the MCU outside of a meme-like context. In the comics, he sacrifices himself to take down Maelstrom, but is revived as the Angel of Death, at which point he gets a major power boost. So perhaps this iteration as the Angel of Death could make an appearance, hinting at the backstory of having been Doorman in a previous life.
Number 4, Magneto. It's hard to imagine Marvel introducing the X-Men into the MCU without also introducing Charles Xavier's #1 frenemy, Magneto. Magneto is such a key and imposing villain in the comics. He has been portrayed twice on the screen with Michael Fassbender and Ian McKellen killing it both times. Furthermore than just the popularity of the character and the necessity for him to appear opposing the mutants, some insider gossip and possible rumors suggest that Magneto will be teaming up with none other than Doctor Doom in the 5th phase of Marvel. And not only does that completely make sense, it's also terribly cool to imagine. There isn't much to say because if the MCU is getting mutants, this is kind of a no-brainer. Number 3, Galactus. In Eternals, we learn that unborn Celestials are planted inside planets across the universe, waiting for intelligent life to reach a point in which those Celestials can use that energy to be born, destroy said planet, and begin creating another sun that will power another galaxy in the place of the one destroyed. Being an ancient universe entity, Galactus is an all-powerful cosmic being that acts as a balance of power in the current universe. He does this by devouring planets throughout the cosmos as a source of energy to stay alive. It is more likely than not that Arishem the Judge, a Celestial, considers the death of a baby Celestial as a punishable offense. Galactus could be in the MCU as a tool the Celestials use to devour planets. Galactus often prides himself as a force of balance in the universe, and with Earth being such a powerhouse planet in the cosmos, its failed emergence is likely to upset the balance of things. Or, what if Galactus was actually hunting planets with the immense amount of energy a celestial seed would provide? This cosmic being is known for having a huge appetite that can only be satisfied by consuming the energy of planets. With certain planets, including Earth, hosting a celestial seed inside of them, a Herald of Galactus could view it as a great source of energy to keep Galactus fed. And that's not even mentioning the Fantastic Four. They're also famous for doing battle with Galactus. He also shares a connection with another famous Marvel character. There are lots of reasons he could show up. Number 2, Apocalypse. When we were talking about Kang, we talked about how he traveled through history. Well, speaking of characters who had roles in history, one of Kang's time-displaced alternates is called Rama-Tut, who was a pharaoh in ancient Egypt, and he had a bit of a backstory that involved another major villain, the ancient proto-mutant Apocalypse. More than his connection to Kang and the mutants, Apocalypse is also empowered with ancient celestial technology, and the Celestials have had more than a few mentions throughout the MCU, with a major role in the Eternals movie. Also, this major villain is arguably as powerful, if not possibly more powerful than Thanos in different ways. Actually, speaking of Thanos, Apocalypse may be a bit too much like the Big Chin in terms of stature and the fact that he has his Horsemen of the Apocalypse like Thanos has the Black Order, but he has so much more to offer than that. I also think we gotta get a live-action redemption for this villain after the kind of bad Age of Apocalypse X-Men movie from 2016, but that's just my opinion. Number 1, The Beyonder. The original Secret Wars series, initiated by Marvel Comics in the 80s, was spearheaded by a cosmic entity known as the Beyonder, who observed the multiversal heroes and villains and, wishing to know more about human nature and conflict, transported them to an alternate world he created known as Battle World, made out of a mishmash of parts of Earth and other planets in the galaxy. The Beyonder brought together Marvel superheroes and villains onto this world, such as the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, and Spider-Man, including antagonists Dr. Octopus, Kang the Conqueror, and most importantly, Molecule Man and Dr. Doom. The threat of multiversal incursions that played a large part in the 2015 Secret Wars has already been established in 2022's Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and we can strongly suspect Dr. Doom will be introduced very soon. After Thanos, the MCU needs a main villain with another more original motive. The Beyonder's desire to understand human nature allows for interesting narrative possibilities and philosophical discussions. Why conflict is inevitable, why people always want to achieve something more, and why imperfection makes life worth living are some of the themes the culmination of the MCU's Phase 5 could tackle. Not to mention, Beyonder is leagues and bounds beyond the power of Thanos.
Number 8, Jean Grey. Jean Grey is another mutant that people are likely hyped to see again, despite the fact that the Dark Phoenix film was not quite up to standard when it came to what fans and moviegoers were hoping for. We've seen Famke Janssen and Sophie Turner portray the character, but who will be next? Jean is such a complex and interesting character who, if played right, I think could be one of the most loved mutant team members. There are times when she is sassy and powerful, but she also generally manages to be compassionate and caring as well. She's a great role model and one of the most powerful mutants in the world. Not only that, but Jean is also one of the original members of the X-Men who, like Bobby Drake, has only gotten cooler as time goes on. Pun definitely intended. Number 7, Madeline Pryor. Madeline Pryor might usually be on the side of evil, but that does not stop me from wanting her in the MCU. We need a lot of good villains in here. In fact, give me all the mutant villains in the MCU. There are just so many good ones. Included in that group of good baddies is Maddie for sure. The Goblin Queen almost helped to open a gate to Limbo, which would have allowed the world to have been overrun by demons and monsters back in Inferno. Aside from that, the whole reason she is a villain has to do with her questioning her own validity as a person after her husband left her and she found out she was a clone of his ex, who he basically had left her for when she had returned. Jean Grey. Maddie has always lived in Jean's shadow and is a great foil for that character as well as the mutant hero team that Jean often fights alongside. She'd also be a super fun character to play in a film, especially if the performer playing her was also playing Jean. I mean, I would love to play Jean and Maddie in a movie. That would be so much fun. Both those characters are so different and so cool. It's a good time. Number 6, Gambit. Gambit is another hero that many were hyped to see appear. Well, I think for some there were conflicting feelings in regards to the project he was supposed to appear in before, but I'm sure a lot of people were excited about it. Gambit back in the days of Fox was meant to be in a film that we'd be getting starring Channing Tatum as Gambit. Now, due to delays with Disney buying 21st Century Fox and the project changing hands as well as script issues when it came to the plot and direction of the story, the film never happened. However, Gambit is still a super popular character who I think many of us would love to see appear on the big screen, especially in his own solo film. I was even intrigued enough by the project that I would have been super interested to see Tatum's take on Gambit. Should Disney and Marvel possibly feature Gambit in the MCU and still want to keep that casting? I mean, I'm still kinda here for that. I think it's a weird casting, but I think it could also be really good. Number 5. Magneto. Magneto is probably one of the most fierce and important enemies and later allies the X-Men have had throughout their comic book history. He was also the first villain to ever appear in the comics for them, appearing as the antagonist in the very first issue of Uncanny X-Men issue number 1, back in the 1960s. In the films, Magneto has also been legendary, and it's because of this that most people would likely enjoy seeing him return to the big screen in the MCU. Now, whether or not we get someone new or see either Ian McKellen or Michael Fassbender return to the role has yet to be decided. In fact, we may even see someone completely new take the role upon themselves, as this is a fresh continuity. But one thing is for certain, you can't have an X-Men franchise without Eric, or Max if you prefer, somewhere in there. Number 4. Professor X. What would a mutant film / world be without Professor X? I mean, he's basically the reason that the X-Men exist. So if we're going to have that team or some variation of that team in the films, then I think we kinda need Professor X to be there. I know some people might be thinking right now, but wait a minute, Amanda, we already got Professor X in the MCU in Multiverse of Madness. But we didn't really. We got a variant of Professor X from an alternate reality who seems to have a similarity to both Fox's older Professor X, with Patrick Stewart returning to reprise that role, and the 90s animated series Professor X, with that big yellow hovercraft version of a wheelchair. So we still technically need a main continuity Professor X in the MCU. Whether that's James McAvoy or Patrick Stewart or someone new, someone will likely need to fill in that role. Or at least we need someone to bring the X-Men together if it's not Professor X, but I feel like to not have Professor X would be a little, I don't know if I feel comfortable with it. It's kind of integral to the X-Men. Number 3. Storm. Obviously a mutant that we're all excited to see join the MCU is Storm. She is hands down and across the board a favorite among fans of the 90s animated series, the comics, and even of the Fox film franchise, where Halle Berry played her. Storm is a legendary character though, which means casting her will be challenging, as Marvel Studios and Disney will want to make sure they really pick the perfect person for this role. This isn't just complicated in regards to finding the right performer who is able to pull off the look and, you know, the whole persona of Storm, but it's also deciding what distinct look and what kind of distinct persona they want to use for this character, because she's had a lot of changes throughout her history. What part of Storm's story they want to tell, what point in her life do they want to use to introduce her, and then of course there is making sure that the performer they pick to play her is a sound investment, as this person will likely be in the franchise for a long time and will hopefully be one of the main faces for the franchise. I'd really love to have like a big Storm element in whatever mutant thing we get. I personally think Storm should have her own movie. Storm's awesome. Number 2. Wolverine. One of the mutants that everyone seems to be the most hyped for, and to see make an appearance and return to the big screen in the MCU, is Wolverine. While some are hoping for Hugh Jackman to don the claws once more and reprise his role as Logan, others are just excited about the return of the character and are placing bets for which new talent could pull it off the best. Lately, I've seen actors like Jensen Ackles have their name tossed into the ring for who would be best to take up this role, but another few fan favorites almost since the beginning of the discussion, with the announcement that the mutants would be coming to the MCU, are Taron Egerton and Daniel Radcliffe, who I also think could pull off the role quite well. Number 1. Wolverine. There aren't just one, but actually 2 Wolverines that people would really love to see potentially head to the big screen. Or I guess I should say, return to the big screen via the MCU. One of those Wolverines is Laura Kinney, formerly known as X-23, Wolverine's genetic offspring / clone. People fell in love with her character in the Fox film Logan, where we met a child version of X-23 who is brought to Logan and who he seeks to protect, even as he faces the end of his own life, with his healing factor struggling to keep up. Like Wolverine before her, Laura's Wolverine also has a powerful healing factor and is an immensely good fighter, having been trained since birth to be a weapon. Currently in the comics, Laura is also known as Wolverine, and some have theorized that instead of Logan, we could get Laura instead as our Wolverine. That way they wouldn't have to deal with recasting Wolverine in the same way, which might be a tall order, as there are many who were won over by Jackman's portrayal and who still love that version of the character.
At number 4 is Squirrel Girl. Girl. Probably the most competent member of the Great Lakes Avengers, Squirrel Girl actually has a decent chance to appear in some iteration in a future MCU project. At first glance, she seems like a pretty silly character sporting a big furry squirrel tail and ears, but she actually has a pretty decent power set on top of it, including super strength, night vision, a healing factor, and superhuman leaping. She's also adept with computers and communications, so even if we don't see her on the battlefield, it's possible she appears in the control room of some SHIELD operation at some point. I don't know, Squirrel Girl is a cult favorite, and out of all the weird characters on this list, she's probably one of the most respected out of all of them. At number 3 we have Howard the Duck. We all know that back in 2014, Marvel gifted viewers with one of the best memes of the year with a fake post-credits sequence suggesting that there'd be a Howard movie coming out in the MCU. Of course, this was just a poke at how silly the idea would be, and I agree. I just think that now, with all the fan service that has been done over the last few years, it's possible that we get to see this little dude again at some point. All joking aside though, Howard the Duck has appeared in so many Marvel events in the comics at one point or another that his wiki is actually up there with one of the longer reads out of any hero I've read. From the Fear Itself storyline to Original Sin, Marvel Comics often takes any interdimensional event as an excuse to bring back Howard for a laugh. So why wouldn't they continue to do so in the MCU? I bet the Guardians of the Galaxy post-credits scene wasn't the last we'll see of this very serious detective. And the 1986 feature film with a 14% on Rotten Tomatoes does not count. At number 2 we have Marrow. A former member of the X-Men, Marrow is another example of a sort of weird character that we can imagine being featured in one way or another in an upcoming MCU project. Definitely not in this phase, since they haven't yet included X-Men in their rollouts as of yet, but maybe in phase 5 they'll dig deep and feature some more niche X-Men like Marrow. Her powers are basically that she can grow her bones on command. Well, at first it isn't on command really, she is actually known at first to have very little control of her powers, leaving her overtaken by the extreme growth of bone matter from within her body, which is sort of gross and terrifying, but perhaps that could be used in a cool way for the MCU. Maybe Marrow is facing challenges controlling her powers throughout one of the movies, and only when Professor X helps her hone them does she come through as a Deus Ex Machina at the end of one of the movies. I don't know, something like that. She's not even that weird honestly, I just genuinely think I'd like to see her in an MCU project. At number 1 we have the one and only, my all-time favorite, 3D Man. If you've watched my other Weird Heroes lists, you'll know by now that I am a huge fan of 3D Man. Is that ironic? Is it a serious claim? You can't tell. Well, honestly, it's a bit of both. Primarily, I just love the idea of a hero that's 3D themed with absolutely no relationship to anything 3D whatsoever. Something about the character being stuck in the early 2000s when 3D had hit another golden age, sporting a green and red suit and the whole thing, something about that just makes me laugh. So that's the ironic side, but honestly, I think this character could be explored further. Delroy Garrett Jr. grew up as a track and field star, competing in the Olympics and the whole 9 yards, no pun intended. But I feel like there hasn't been a hero that's before anything else an athlete. Unless you count Spider-Girl. I guess Spider-Girl was an athlete in school, but she hasn't been in the MCU. But I just feel like this could be a cool opportunity for Marvel to offer more representation to the athletics community. That and how 3D Man's whole vibe is lost in time, and it would be so cool and maybe a bit refreshing to revisit that retro early 2000s era at some point on the big or small screen.